The house changed after the river. Not suddenly, not with a single shock or a clear sign. It changed the way a room changes when a door is opened in winter. A subtle drop in temperature first, a whisper of air under the threshold, a draft you pretend not to notice. Objects kept their shapes, shadows kept their places, but the space between things felt thinner. What had been solid now sounded a little hollow when Erin Walker crossed it at night. The phone remained where she left it on the kitchen table, still and face down, as if an inanimate object could choose to avert its gaze. Its battery should have died hours ago. It didn't. The screen pulsed once every few minutes with a dim, tidal glow, as if synced to a slow breath. It had started doing that after she found the waterlogged phone in the reeds. The broken relic had not followed her home. She had not touched it again. Yet somehow its presence seemed to trail her like moisture on a cold window. An imprint, a suggestion, a partial outline of another world pressed against this one. The hours lengthened toward 2 a.m., the house ticking softly with settling wood and distant rain gutters. Erin moved through each room with a deliberate quiet, as if silence itself might be startled into making a noise. Something had been set in motion at the riverbank, a choreography of time and place that would not allow her to stand still any longer. The first voicemail had been a shock. The replay had been proof. Whatever the thing was, recording, signal, or imprint, it was not over. At 2:10 a.m., the refrigerator motor cut out and left a ringing emptiness in its place. The phone brightened slightly on the table. The pulsing glow stilled, became a steady pane of light, and then dimmed again, holding just above black, the way a dying ember holds color at its core. Erin stood on the threshold, one palm on the doorframe, listening to the house as if it were breathing through the vents. She did not want to touch the device, yet could not stand being more than a room away. The compulsion didn't feel like curiosity anymore. It felt like gravity. At 2:14 a.m., the lights along the hallway dipped and recovered. Not a power surge, not a flicker from the grid. It looked more like a change in the density of air, like heat above asphalt rippling. A soft, high tone rose from nowhere and everywhere at once, so faint it might have been imagined, and then the phone's lock screen lifted into an image without her touch. The photo of the bridge appeared again, overhead angle, a night composition that no one had taken, and yet existed. In the picture, a figure stood at the railing with their head turned toward the river. The timestamp in the corner read what it always read, 2:16 a.m. The second message did not announce itself as a notification. It arrived the way fog arrives, not a thing in motion, but a condition that suddenly exists with no discernible beginning. The voicemail app opened by itself, and a new entry slid into the list as if settling into a groove it had made for itself days ago. The title was blank, the number the same, the length undefined. The first one had been an aberration. The second made it a pattern. Patterns endure. When Erin pressed play, the sound did not begin in her ears. It began in her chest. A low pressure spread beneath the sternum, an audible weight that did not travel through the air so much as grow inside the body like weather. The recording static, once an irritant, now carried a texture the mind could almost parse. The tooth of water across metal, a faint slap of current against an object that didn't belong in a river. Beneath that, the same breath pattern she had learned by heart, and under that a noise that had not been present before. A faint scrape, then another, as if something were turning in gravel. The refrigerator motor did not start again. The house abandoned all other sounds to make room for this one. The recording deepened. Erin closed her eyes, not to shut it out, but to let the mind draw the unseen. She pictured what the noise suggested. Not a person returning, not a voice pleading from beyond, but a place replaying itself. A system trying over and over to reconcile an event it could not metabolize. A loop, a scar, a knot in time the world was trying to comb through and failing. The new message lengthened beyond what the app could easily display. Seconds stacked, bled into ghost minutes, then leveled into a plateau of silence that felt less like absence and more like a figure standing in a doorway. The first message had led her to the bridge. The second led nowhere on a map. It led inward. It led down. When the audio changed again, it did so by growing quieter, and what emerged by subtraction was a sound that did not belong to phones or rivers or weather. It was the steady tick of a directional blinker echoing off concrete. It was the soft mechanical clatter of a seatbelt retracting. It was the dull shiver of a chassis surrendering to cold water. These were not memories Aaron possessed, and yet the body recognized them the way a person recognizes an unmarked childhood street, not by name, but by the way the trees lean. The voice did not return. The figure did not appear. Only the circumstances reassembled themselves around an absence. The recording continued to show her what the eye could not hold. Case facts suggested an accident. Investigators had a timeline. The divers had a point of entry and recovery. But the world has more than one kind of truth. On the table, the phone rested in a field of dark like a porthole to the riverbed. And in the house, air grew dense with pressure, the kind that flattens sound and swallows your own breath. Erin reached for the back of a chair to steady herself without looking. The room tilted, then corrected. A narrow band of quiet opened in the recording, and through it came something so faint the brain dismissed it twice before admitting it was there. A second cadence, lower than the first, separate from the known breath pattern. She did not need words to understand the shape of the presence it implied. It was not a person, not exactly. It was a decision. It was a pair of hands on a steering wheel, not hers, not his, but near. A pressure on a shoulder, a turn taken too late or too early, a narrowing of space on a fog-drowned road where lines mean less than instincts. The loop had been claimed by two centers, one she loved and one she did not know. The recording dissolved. The house returned by degrees. First the refrigerator motor hum, then a sheet metal creak in the ducts, then a slight breath of winter air under the back door. The phone screen cooled, went to black, and held there as if exhausted. Erin remained standing with her palm on the chair and her eyes still closed, cataloging the quiet. It had substance now. It felt like a thing you could lean against, and it did not lean back. She did not call anyone. She did not write anything down. There would be time for contact and lists and official words, but she knew the shape of what had to come next, and it had nothing to do with consolation. It had to do with evidence. The second message had not guided her to a location. It had guided her to a layer. She understood she would need to find the place where that layer was thinnest, where the loop bled through in ways a phone could confirm and an eye could not explain. She left at 1:48 a.m., long before the world grows curious about what dawn will do with it. The streets were empty. The river was not. It moved with the patient confidence of a thing that has outlived everything that names it. Erin parked beneath the bridge again, not in defiance, but in recognition, and walked the access road with a careful cadence, matching her steps to the memory of the second message's quiet tick. There is a tempo to trauma. There is a tempo to return. The reeds whispered along the bank where she'd found the drowned phone. She did not approach that place. Instead, she followed the river north to a bend that had not appeared on any of the app's red pinpoints, yet existed on the overhead photo like a variational smudge, a smear of light where none should be. It was a low shelf of concrete and stone, part of an old flood control project, shaped to hold water for a time and then release it. The water had held. It had never quite let go. Erin stepped onto the shelf and crouched with the phone in her open palm, the black screen reflecting a thin arc of sky. There were choices here. She felt them in the soles of her boots. The shelf pitched down to a depth where figures would be twisted from above by refraction.
It pitched up to a shallow where the reeds rooted hard and mud took the ankles of all but the lightest. The loop had not chosen, it had been chosen. The presence she had felt in the second message was not a haunt, but a hand. The device warmed against her skin. The screen did not wake, but the haptic spoke once, a small pulse, like a knock. Then another, a third. The intervals were regular, far apart, patient. The fourth pulse came with a faint shape in the glass, not an image, not a notification, but a milky haze that moved on the inside surface like breath. She knew she was not the one fogging it. When the recording started, it did not use the app. The signal rose from the phone's frame as a pressure and fell into the shelf as a tremor.
The water answered without ripple. Whatever she had reached for had arrived and had done so without needing to cross the distance in between. The loop and the moment sat in the same space, agreeing to exist side by side as long as she didn't blink too hard. The composition became clear because the body knows how to assemble disaster. Headlights set at the wrong pitch, mist carrying light and hiding shape. Guardrail paint scuffed at a human height from a previous, unrelated life. The smell of a dashboard warming under hands that had gripped it too long. The river positioned like the last sentence in a story that refuses the period. No dialogue, no plea, no spectral argument, just weight and angle, sequence and consequence. The second center belonged to someone whose name she didn't know and now didn't need. The world had recorded the decision in steel and water. The voicemail was not voice at all. It was the river's chronicle laid down in pressure and time, a phonograph made of current and a needle made of grief. The shelf shuddered once as if something heavy were set down on it in a past that would not stop happening. Erin almost lost balance. Her hand shot to the cold lip of concrete and stuck there as if the material itself did not want to let go. The phone brightened. The haze on the glass cleared. For a fraction of a second, the screen showed her what it had never shown before. Not the overhead bridge, not coordinates or numbers, but her own reflection, altered by a tilt she would have argued against if gravity hadn't demonstrated it with such indifference. She saw herself as the river would see her, a figure turned sideways by moving surface, arms out of proportion, features drawn long by a lens with no regard for human vanity. It wasn't monstrous, it was indifferent. Indifference can be the cruelest kind of supernatural. She stood. The phone cooled again. Somewhere behind the bridge, a siren sounded in a city that had not learned tonight's lesson. Erin moved back from the shelf, step by measured step, letting the world reclaim the space she had borrowed. The third pulse arrived when she reached the access road. It did not feel like an invitation. It felt like a schedule. The loop had its hour. 2:16 a.m. was not the exact time a man had died. It was the exact time the world had decided to keep retelling it. The afterlife had nothing to do with voices. It had everything to do with repetition. By dawn, Erin had a plan, and the calm that sometimes enters a person after the worst idea becomes the only one that makes sense. She would document the loop, not with a single phone, but with instruments that recorded without interpretation. External audio recorders, time-stamped cameras, passive sensors for pressure and magnetic variation. She would assemble them in a grid at the shelf and the reeds and the point where headlights broke, and she would let the world speak in the language it had chosen. She would give it formats humans trusted so that humans would doubt less. Not to convince them of ghosts, but to convince them that events are more complicated than causes. The day yielded the equipment without friction. Rentals, borrowed pieces, a purchase she hadn't expected to make. The sun moved across a pale November sky and never once penetrated the windows of her car with warmth.
Aaron ate in fractions and drank water that tasted like copper. By evening, a map had taken shape on paper. Circles where pressure had gathered, squares where audio shifted from noise to indices, arrows tracing the path of the first red pinpoints along the river. She had built a template for a system that did not care about templates. She would give it its hour and watch it decide. Night came without color. She parked farther away to force her senses alert and carried the equipment in 2 trips, placing each item with the gravity of a ritual performed not to invoke, but to witness. She set a camera high on a tripod where reeds would not sway into the frame. She weighted a contact mic against the concrete shelf and sealed its edges against the water's cold mouth. She taped time codes where the lens might see them. She checked batteries in order of their expected failure and left redundancy where stubbornness had no right to breathe. At 2:12, the world announced its intention with a breeze that carried no temperature and moved nothing. At 2:14, the lights on the bridge above performed the same breathless dip. At 2:15, the river flattened. The second message began at 2:16 with no sound at all. Erin watched the numbers roll on the camera display and felt the shelf's answer in her knees. She did not look at the phone. She looked at the frame. The lens held the scene with a patience that made her want to apologize to it in advance. When the pressure wave arrived, the contact mic caught it cleanly. When the quiet tick of a blinker echoed from concrete not present, the recorder obeyed and kept something humans would insist on calling proof. When the second center pressed its hands into the scene like fingerprints on still setting paint, the grid she had built betrayed it with timestamps she would not need to defend with myth. No voice, no apparition. The loop chose indifference again and replayed alignment and angle and outcome with inhuman restraint. It was a perfect witness to itself and did not ask for interpretation. Still, in the last seconds before the world released its held breath, the phone in her pocket warmed. Not a pulse this time, more like a hand closing around her own to guide her attention 1 degree to the left. In the viewfinder, a shape thickened at the line where the shelf seated to depth. Not a person, not a jacket. A density, a knot. The last letter of a sentence catching on a misplaced nail. The event had arguments with itself. One center insisted, and the other yielded, and then traded places until neither remembered the first position they had taken. The loop was negotiations and fatigue, and a grief the river had learned to carry because humans could not. The world exhaled. A wind moved across the surface with an ease that felt obscene after what it had held. The siren in the distance, another city's problem, shrank and turned away. She shut the equipment down without ceremony. She packed it with the same stillness with which she had placed it. The phone did not ask for attention. It stayed cool. It did not advertise its role. She felt a respect for it that surprised her, not because it had been the instrument, but because it had surrendered that role when she asked it to. At home, the house accepted her without comment. The refrigerator motor cut in and out with mammal regularity. Upstairs, the sleep she would not yet take waited in a dark room that had not changed at all. Erin placed the phone face up on the table and laid the drive from the camera beside it. She did not press play. She let the morning approach with its routines, and its pencils, and its paperwork, and its human scaffolding meant to catch events before they collapse into stories. She would use that scaffolding. She would practice a new ritual. Report, retrieve, repeat. When the phone lit on its own one last time before dawn, it showed her the carrier's voicemail screen without a new message. The first and second sat together, or the idea of them did. The way echoes sit together in a canyon, layered, inseparable. becoming one thing that nevertheless contains the order of what preceded it. The house remained still. The phone remained quiet. The river continued to speak in a language the world had always known how to read. Somewhere, not far, not near, a blinker ticked in a place no car had the right to signal. It went unheard by everyone except the water, and the water did not need to hear it to understand. The time on the stove flipped to 2:17. It meant nothing to the loop. It meant everything to the living. Erin set an alarm for the following night without looking at the hour. She would return with her grid. She would keep returning until the loop frayed, or until her grief learned to live beside it without trying to translate it. She could not fix the sentence. She could only make sure the world did not forget where its period had been placed and who had placed it there. The city's lights went down to embers. The sky lifted one imperfect shade toward morning. The phone cooled at last and did not pulse again. A schedule had been agreed. A silence had been earned. And under the bridge, where a shelf of concrete remembers better than people, the second message arranged itself to be played again tomorrow, exactly when it wanted to be, whether anyone listened or not.